Hello, powerful women. Welcome back to the School of Self-Worth. I'm your host, Nicole Song. So today for the podcast, I'm taking a little bit of a detour into the world of books. Now, if you know me, this is not an actual detour, but it's a detour a little bit for the podcast. But I thought I'd try something different and see how this goes for all of you. So, May is Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander Heritage Month, also known as AANHPI Heritage Month, or you can also just call it AAPI Month. And in celebration of Asian American culture and heritage, I decided I would actually go into this world that I live in all the time, which is the world of books. And so, if you didn't know it, I'm an avid reader and it's really escalated. I will be sharing more about that in a bit, but like last year in 2023, my goal was to read, I think I started at 45 books, something like that, but I ended up reading 52 books last year, and that is my current goal again for 2024. So I read a lot. By the way, if you're also on Goodreads, please come find me. I love to see what people are reading and trade ideas, and just I love that interaction and community there. So definitely come find me there. I love being with fellow reading friends. And I thought today it would be super fun to share with you some really incredible Asian American authors and books that I've read recently. There's no real container in terms of time for these books. These are just books that I've really enjoyed in the last year and a half or so. And I wanted to share with you what they are and why I love them as a way to celebrate these really incredible creative minds putting amazing work out into the world. So I'm going to be sharing that today. I'm going to share with you my top 5. And if you're an Asian American corporate leader who wants to learn my 5-hour workday system and still be next in line for promotion, DM me 5 on Instagram. I've got something for you. Okay, friends, let's dig into Book World. Hey, everybody. So, I wanted to share a couple of things before I get into my top 5 books about me and reading, just to introduce you a little bit into this world of reading. So, I used to be somebody who would read inconsistently, is what I'd say. As a kid, I was like a crazy reader. And then when I had to read for college, I was a comparative literature major. I got really tired of reading. And so I actually had a long pause, I'd say for more than a decade, where I really didn't read that much. But a vacation, I think 7 or 8 years ago, really sparked the reading bug again for me. And I got into Goodreads challenges where I was reading books. And so I was averaging probably 25 books a year for a few years and felt like I was reading quite a bit. And during that time, I was really mixing it up between nonfiction and fiction. And I'll say what I discovered over time, especially considering the work that I do, which is all about personal development and growth, I have found this works best for me, which is to mainly read fiction. It just gives me this spaciousness in my mind. I love being immersed in other people's worlds. It's so, so much fun for me. And if I want to read a self development book, which I am often interested in, I do those on audio. But I am an old school paperback or hardback reader. I don't have a Kindle, which means my luggage can be pretty heavy on vacation when I'm carrying a few books. I'm a little old fashioned that way, but I just like love reading a book in bed before I go to sleep. So, those are things to know about my book reading habits. The other thing to know is that I actually mostly just get books from the library. I made a challenge for myself several years ago to only read from the library instead of buying books. And I think it probably happened after I had like purged a million books and I just didn't know what to do with all of them. And since then, that's been my main MO. Like I just get books from the library. Whenever I hear of a good book, I just pop it into my holds list. And when that book shows up, I'm like, sweet, I've got a new book. So that's one of the ways I keep getting new ideas for books is like whenever I hear one, as soon as someone recommends something, I put it into my library list. I also put it into Goodreads. I have a little bit harder time tracking on Goodreads, so I mostly track through my library reading holds list. And then I pretty much constantly am being blessed with like huge mountains of books from the library. Because if you've ever done this, you'll know that it's pretty inconsistent when those books actually come in. And then sometimes I'm just forced to read a little bit faster. And I have no guilt if I don't read all the books I get from the library. I just return them. It's not a big deal. So I don't hang on to books. It's the reason I'm not going to have any covers to really show you today. I'm just going to share with you what those books are. And lastly, actually, 2 more things. First, I'm not in any book clubs. Well, I will say this. I'm in a book club of one. I'm in a book club of my own making. It's just me. I'm not in any book clubs. I know lots of you probably are in book clubs, but I've just never been in one or found one that feels like that's worked for me. And so I just read for myself. Like I read for fun and for pleasure. I have many friends who are big readers, and we talk a lot about books. Um, I'm in Seattle. We're really lucky to have an incredible series called Seattle Arts and Lectures, which brings incredible authors from around the world to Seattle. So I love to go to those events with some of my friends. And that's really the way I sort of sustain my book reading culture. And I will also say, too, for today's books, I also very intentionally look for AAPI and other BIPOC authors. I like to keep my reading list as diverse as possible. I will say one of the books I'm going to talk about talks about how white the publishing industry can be. And I often do find if I'm not intentional, I end up reading the popular books or the books that are being recommended. And I have to really take a step back and be like, okay, who am I reading? What are the voices that I want to hear? And I feel like books are a big way that I learn about other cultures, other perspectives, other people. Like I'm always so amazed by the worlds that authors create. And so I really recommend, like, if you are wanting to learn, I find fiction to be such a powerful place for learning. And you'll see in the books that I share that you can really learn so much about other cultures through that. So without further ado, this list is in no particular order. These are just the books I've read recently, ones that have resonated with me, and I highly recommend all of them for various reasons. Okay, so let's get started. My first book on this list I'm going to share is the one I recently finished reading, and it's Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. So this book came out, I believe it was last year, and it was on all of the top lists for the year. And there is definitely a reason for that. So this book is about a writer, a white woman who steals the work of another author who's Asian American, and it's about a book about this era in World War I, where there were Chinese laborers in the war, and so she wrote it. This Asian American author, and then she dies in a freak accident, and then Juniper, the narrator, she steals the manuscript, and then publishes it as if it's her own. So this one is very uncomfortable. Like I was very uncomfortable. I actually really didn't want to read this book, even though I saw it at the library all the time and friends of mine were reading it. I saw it on all the top recommended lists and I was like, I just don't know that I can do this. And it was the name Yellowface. It was the idea of like reading about somebody who steals work from an Asian American author. Like it all made me highly uncomfortable. But one of my friends was like, no, it's like really, really worth it. Like you'll read it so fast, it's going to be worth it. And so then when I was reading it, I was uncomfortable. This is not one of those books you're going to read and like feel relaxed and get swept up into the narrative. It's like highly uncomfortable. Although I feel like most of the best books, there's a constant narrative tension. This is just a different level of tension. The tension is like this person is kind of despicable. Like she's making pretty horrible choices. She's doing things that are pretty racist. And she's also really like the publishing industry embraces this book from her and she shoots to the top of all the bestseller lists and she becomes like the celebrity author that she's always wanted to be. And you're just like, at what cost to herself and to other people? So Kwong does an incredible job drawing out sympathy for her because there were times I actually felt sympathy for Juniper and I was like, how can I feel sympathy for this person? She is crazy. Like she's doing all these insane things. And yet it's just really so well written. And everybody else also around her, very morally ambiguous. And I think it does a really remarkable job commenting on the state of the publishing industry, really skewering the industry for a lot of the things it's doing in terms of representation. And then also, it just has a richness and depth and commentary that is super powerful. I learned a lot about the publishing industry, and it was a really, fascinating look into that side of the business. So if you're interested in that, it's also really good for that. But it's just there's a lot of uncomfortableness, but it was like the kind of uncomfortable that I think is actually very powerful. So I really recommend Yellowface. I was surprised at how much I liked it. This is what I'll say. I didn't like it because I didn't like the narrator, but I liked it because I thought it was a really remarkable book. So go read Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. The next book on my list is The Tea Girl of Hummingbird Lane by Lisa C. Oh, this book is such a delight. I really love this book. So this book is about protagonist Li Yan. She's an Aka, which is an indigenous minority in China. And the Aka are the originators, like they've always grown pu'er tea, if you've heard of that. So this is really her story about being basically growing up in the mountains in Southwest China, which grows this kind of tea. Her life is really defined and immersed by the culture of tea and her family. And it's really a coming of age tale that talks about this. And so she has a child out of wedlock, which becomes a key part of the story. And it's all about her giving up the child because of many factors, the one child policy in China, and also cultural mores at that time in the Aka culture. And then it becomes a tale of both her and then her daughter, who's raised in California. And it's really incredible. Like I learned so much about the Aka. I don't know much about that indigenous minority. And so I learned a lot about them. I learned so much about pu'er tea and the development and the rise of that whole business. And then I learned so much about this person, this protagonist, Li Yan. And it's just like she's so sympathetic. And you learn so much about her and how she starts to make her way out of this tiny village through education to go live in other places. And it's just like there's this through line of the maternal line and how powerful the maternal line is with her and her mother and her child. And it's just a really truly remarkable book. Like at the end I was just like, wow, it's incredible. So I could not recommend this one more either, in all the most beautiful ways. Okay, I would be remiss if I did not put this book on the list. So here it is, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. This book was a smash hit, so you may already have read this. It came out in 2022. I just went to a talk by Gabrielle Zevin, and it just reminded me how much I love this book, so I really wanted to put it back on the list. And so Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow is about two protagonists, Sam and Sadie, who meet when they're children playing video games in a hospital. And then they come together again much later in life. And it's really around the development of their relationship and their coming of age. Well, also, it's about the development of the video game industry because they really track their age in the 80s all the way through till the current day. And so I was never an avid video game player, but I definitely grew up playing Oregon Trail. That's the way you say it, in school. Like I would go to the computer lab and do that. And so when I was listening to Gabrielle talk, she talked about how, everybody who's read the book always feels like the book, especially if they came from that era, like that book was written for them. And then she said, if you did grow up playing the Oregon Trail in a computer lab, you are officially a geriatric gamer. And I was like, wow, okay. So I am officially a geriatric gamer. But I love Sadie and Sam. Like the characters are so richly drawn. And Gabrielle shared about how she wrote this book during the pandemic, and it was her 10th book, and she had some bestsellers and some flops. And then in this book, she really wrote it for herself. And I loved hearing her talk about that because it just made her be like, I don't know if anyone's going to be interested in this book. And then she wrote such a remarkable book. It's full of twists and unexpected turns. It takes you on a journey through the world of video game development. I got so attached to the characters. And it's sort of funny because I really never thought I would care about video game development because like I don't really play video games anymore. But she got me. Like I was so fascinated by every step of this book. Like I remember I read this through the holidays when I was with family, and like I was like everyone was like watching movies and I would like read this book while other people were watching TV because I was so wrapped up in it. And she does such a beautiful job illustrating the depth of relationship that is possible between two friends. And I just seriously love this book. So if you have not read it, this is like hands down, since I read it, still remains one of my top recommendations for people if they have not read a fiction book lately. Like go read Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. And I'll throw in a little plug for The Storied Life of AJ Fikry, which is another one of her books, which is about a bookseller on a tiny island in New England. And just throwing that in is another one. If you're looking for another Gabrielle Zevin read, I really like that one as well. It's very charming. Okay, and next on the list is If I Had Your Face by Frances Cha. And this one is about four women in Seoul, Korea, trying to make their way in the world in a place that is really dominated by discussions, judgments about looks. And it's all about this world where there's salons that are catering to wealthy men. And then also there's a lot about K-pop, which I'm also a big fan of K-pop. So Kyuri is one of the main characters, and she's someone who's had a lot of plastic surgery. And then she has a job at a room salon where she entertains businessmen while they drink. And so you learn a lot about that room salon business. And there's three other women who are connected to her in various ways. And so sometimes, like in this book, I did want to just stick with a couple of the main characters, like Kyuri in particular was really fascinating. And it really wove them all together by the end. And I was pretty fascinated by this idea of the room salons, also the level of plastic surgery and the level of I feel like the beauty standards in Korea, which I've always heard about and known about, but this just gives a much deeper dive into it. And the story was really so well told. And I will say at its heart, it's really a story about friendship. And I do love books that talk about women and their friendship and their connection. And so this book ultimately does a great job showing and depicting that. So If I Had Your Face by Frances Cha, also a really, really great book to read. Okay, and then the last book on my list I'll share is called The Mermaid from Jeju. It's by Sumi Han, Hahn. And I didn't know anything about this. This is one of those really fun books. So this is about women divers in South Korea. Since I read this book, I feel like I've heard a lot more about them, but this book was the first time I really learned or understood anything about them, and this is about their story. So Junja, the main character, is a deep sea diver known as Hanyo, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, probably not. And so Hanyo are actually women deep sea divers based on Jeju Island outside of South Korea. And it's so incredible. Like they are deep sea divers. They collect all the things in the sea for people to eat and sell it. And so this is really the story about a little bit of the history of the Hanyo. Like it's something that's handed down generationally with the women. And so Junja learned from her mother. And then this is really her story about her family. She actually loses her mother to the waves while she's diving. And then it's really about her evolution, her relationship with her grandmother, and then what she goes through when war comes to the island and the US troops arrive. So it's interesting. The time in this one is interesting. Like there's some storytelling that's coming from current day and the perspective of her husband. And so that obviously like things happen and work out because she's much older in some of those narrative flashbacks. But you also get a rich deep dive into history. And then I also felt like really compelling development of character. Like I cared about Junja. I wanted to know what was going to happen to her. And she was really strong in so many different ways. And I loved that physical strength of hers from being a diver. And then also, the internal strength that she shows as she navigates relationships, marriages, war, and all of those pieces. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more about that culture and just love a really strong narrative tale, The Mermaid from Jeju was a super great read. So, those are my 5 recommendations from Asian American Pacific Islander authors that I've really enjoyed. What I would love to hear from all of you is if you have any additional recommendations or if you've actually read any of these books and really enjoyed them. If you have, I want you to just DM me on Instagram at Nicole Song. It makes me feel like I would love to feel like I'm in a little bit of a mini book club with all of you, hearing about your recommendations, the books that you've really enjoyed, like what you've enjoyed about those stories. Send them to me. I am literally always looking for book recommendations. So send those to me in my DMs. And then also, if you enjoyed this, I would love to, pop in more and share some more about books at any time. I literally am reading all the time. I love talking about books. It's one of my favorite topics. Just ask anyone in my life week. I can talk about books literally endlessly forever. So if you want to chat with me about books, DM me on Instagram. Let's talk about books. And thank you all so much for listening today. I'm so grateful that you are sticking with me all the way through to the end. All right, I'll see you all next time.